what's happening in different economies? In the case of the US, up to now, the data I have from the US is not worrisome. January has been a fair month, February has been a fair month, but we still don't have the March data. And all the effects will be felt in March. Okay. If you look at the non-manufacturing ISM, 57 is very good, but the bad thing will come in March. That's why I think that if there is negative growth in the States, it will be Q2. It's not going to be in Q1. Now, some signals are telling you there is a recession coming in the States. Spreads, tensions in the credit market, in the money market, the yield curve inverted a few days, as you know. Fine. If you want to understand and to follow and to have an idea on whether the US is going to get into a recession, the best thing is to look at the job market. Whenever you see sharp increases in the unemployment rate in the States, you will have a recession, defined as 2 quarters of negative growth. So how can you monitor that? Looking every Thursday, the initial jobless claims. How many people have gone into unemployment? The latest data we have is 216,000, which is very good. If you see this thing going at 300,000, then this is telling you that there is a recession coming. This is the way to monitor the situation in the States. In the meantime, salaries are growing at 3%, which is okay. Okay, inflation is under control, 1.6. As you know, the Fed has already decreased rates 50 basis points. They will have to announce new movements going forward. And I think the Fed will have to announce plenty of new liquidity provisions to make sure that people don't default. The problem, guys, is that sometimes when you have these situations and people don't consume and people just don't invest, your company still has the fixed costs and you don't have the revenues. So you cannot pay your taxes, you cannot pay your interest expenses. So you have to create some incentives so that these companies are able to sustain these 2 quarters. Okay, and you can provide this with extraordinary liquidity measures by the central bank or with tax relief measures such as allowing companies not to pay the payrolls for 2 months. I think yesterday the US is announcing some of these measures. And of course, the situation could have deep political implications in the US in terms of the elections in November, which we're going to see in a minute. So what worries me, basically that in the US you have a lot of investment grade bonds. Many of them, as you can see in my left, are BBB. Now, the portion of BBB bonds, especially those BBB minus, that could be reconsidered into BBB plus is considerable, and there is not enough money. I think there is more or less $5 trillion in investment grade bonds, 1 trillion in high yield. So let's assume that 1 out of the 5 trillion investment grade goes into high yield. You have a nightmare in the market. And the US has increased its ratio of corporate debt. As you know, they have leveraged the companies and they have been buying back stock. So this is a fragile situation. So what you're seeing in the States is already that the number of job openings is coming down. I think I told you 2 months ago that I had seen something extraordinary in the States. There were 7 million job openings, 5 million people unemployed. The first time ever I see more job openings than people unemployed. Okay. This produced a tension in salaries. Job openings have came down, so companies are no longer hiring as aggressively as in the past. But what you need for a recession to happen is not that people stop hiring, it's that people begin firing people. And we are not there yet. Today, salaries are growing at 3%, but if you look at low-wage industries, salary growth is around 4%. Okay, so this is a situation, politically speaking, that if it were to be sustained, is very good for the incumbent president. Okay, because people are seeing stock markets up to a month at a good level, house prices going up, no unemployment, lowest level of unemployment since 1969, and good wage growth, especially low earners. The last quartile of people are making the best salary increases. This world has changed today. Probably the employment market is going to be weaker, stock market has been crashed, and probably the situation will make people afraid, and they will not ask for salary increases as aggressively as 2 months ago. So this, I updated this morning, these are the chances of Trump winning the presidency in November. So what happened is that the chances 6 months ago were around 40%. As Sanders began to win the primaries, then the chances went up a lot because they thought that Sanders was too leftist to win to Trump. So many moderate voters would go for Trump, and it went up to 55%. What has happened very recently, as you know, on one hand, the chances of Joe Biden getting elected got higher, but especially you had the coronavirus. Now, this is very sensitive for a US voter because Trump reduced the allocation into the CDC, Central of Control of Diseases. And also he reduced the amount of funding into the World Health Organization. And as you know, there is still 20 million people without health insurance in the States. So if the coronavirus spreads into the States, there is going to be a big issue, because these 20 million people, let's see what it could happen, and let's look at what happens with the infection rates. So today, the chances of Trump getting re-elected are below 50%. If there is a recession in the States out of the coronavirus, probably this will mean that Joe Biden will win the presidency, which is amazing how an external shock could have issues such as threatening a leader such as Trump or weakening another leader such as Xi Jinping. It's amazing. Going into China, main ideas. China is going to go into negative growth for the first time in the Cultural Revolution. Okay, this means that the Chinese growth is going to go in the first quarter to 2 to 3% year over year. There should be a recovery, but I think it's going to be a square root. The main worry in China is housing market. In China, you have a big problem with housing. Too many houses, too much credit attached to housing, and house sales are down 90%. So if you're a developer, if you don't sell your houses, guess what? You have a big problem. You cannot service your debt. So I think there is structural problems in this market. The second problem is that banks don't lend money to SMEs. They've channeled their funding to large state-owned companies. So SMEs are an extremely relevant part of the Chinese economy, and they need to get access to credit. And this is why they are vulnerable. So what the Chinese are doing, the People's Bank of China has already injected $100 billion in targeted operations to fund banks so that they lend this money to SMEs. The risk is that if there is a real estate problem in China, the bad debts will triple from 2 to 6%, in which case you're going to have a banking problem. Now, what's happening in the Chinese economy? This is updated to yesterday. This is the Financial Times, which collects information such as labor migration index, where people are going back to the original work, coal consumption index, freight logistic activity index, urban civil transportation index. So there is a volatility in this data, but things sooner or later are improving. They are getting better. So China is getting back into work. Is it going to get to work as much as in December? No way. That's the problem. Okay, again, this data is supportive for Chinese to get into positive growth in the second quarter, but also a very muted pace. Now, the index which was extremely worrisome was the manufacturing PMI, which got levels to more or less 35 or 40, depending if you take the Caixin or the official one. If you look at the services one, it went below 30. It's the lowest ever reading of the PMI. So this is telling you that the first quarter growth rate is going to be a nightmare, real nightmare. But again, when you look at data, you see that when you have viruses impacting an economy, sharp slowdown, and then you see a recovery. House sales, major 30 cities, you see an average of in a week you sell 4,000 houses. Okay, and now what you are seeing is that there would be more or less around 200. Sharp decrease on house sales, and this is a big issue for our country, where real estate makes directly and indirectly more than 20% of GDP. So if you look at the daily econometric model to test what's happening with Chinese economy, this updated I think last Saturday, the Chinese economy is today growing more or less at 2% year over year, which means that probably you're going to see a negative growth of 3% quarter over quarter. I have never seen the Chinese growth rate at 2%, never in my life. So this has very serious implications. And of course, when you go from high growth into low growth, guess what? It's not that easy to sustain some sectors, such as real estate. And here you have the cumulative relation of banking assets in China versus the US, Japan, or the Eurozone. I told you there is a lot of leverage in China. Look it through the banking system. Okay, so banking assets have multiplied by 5-fold in China since 2008. Part of these assets are linked to real estate. If real estate prices go down, you have a big problem with some Chinese banks. What about developers? Developers, they basically get a lot of money from pre-selling the houses to guys who want a house. Okay, and then they have their loans. What happens if they don't sell their houses? They don't have enough money to keep building the house. So there is a risk that some of these developers will default, which will be bad for the banks who own the debt, but also for the Chinese people who have prepaid for the house. And this can produce a social problem. And any positive effect of the coronavirus. These are NASA pictures taken a few days ago. Pollution levels of China before the crisis and now after the crisis. So basically, the fact that China has reduced a lot of the GDP, then this meant that the quality of air has improved a lot. I think the University of Stanford has calculated that this improvement in the quality of air has already saved 16,000 lives. In the meantime, once China gets back into normality, remember the structural factors in China: real estate bubble. Second, they have a problem with population, number of newborns per 1,000 people in China. More or less, they have 1 children per female. I think the average in Europe is 1.6, the US is 1.7, 1.8. So what this means is that population growth has to be negative. Okay, when you have negative population growth, it's very hard to grow. So I think that China is gonna get into a kind of mediocre growth going forward. I think this is the likely scenario. And the working age population, as you can see, has been coming down since 2011. This is what goes into GDP. Number of people working, which drives the number of hours worked, and productivity. Europe. Do we have any data up to now? Yes. Composite PMI is 52, which is okay. It went up 1 point. This is February data. Why? Because most of the PMI surveys are done between the 1st and the 20th of February. So you are not capturing in this data the recent events. The ECB is going to be meeting tomorrow, and they will be on Thursday. They will be announcing the new initiatives